Good? OK, perfect. So welcome to the session on taking advantage of identity capabilities in Windows Azure Pack. It's a Friday morning. You guys probably had fun on Thursday. 5 floors up in the corner of the building. You guys must really want to know about identity, huh? So this is Markwa Naik. He's an MVP with Windows Azure Pack.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And I'm Sriram Natarajan. I'm a program manager with Windows Azure Pack. And I work on security and PowerShell and identity for the product. So today, we're going to take you through identity in the product end to end. This is going to be anywhere between a 200 level and a 300 level session, where we're going to start from assuming that you guys have not played with it enough up to a point where we think you've actually played with it more than necessary and you want to see the guts of how things work. So it's going to alternate between this and that so that you guys can actually balance it, right? So today we're going to be talking about 3 major things. I'm going to be walking you through identity fundamentals, more like what terms we use when we discuss identity about the product, talk about authentication and stuff like that. So at the end of that section, if you go outside the session and you actually go read articles on TechNet anywhere about identity, you will see these terms occur in different places, and they will actually make much more sense to you than they did before the session. That would be the goal of that section. And then we're going to jump into demo mode, and we're going to run you through a whole lot of demos on how does WAP work with an identity system. So we're going to use ADFS to kind of show WAP and ADFS integration and what needs to be configured and stuff like that. And then we're going to take you through a little bit of tokens. So we're going to go detail as to what exactly the flows are, open up a network capturing software, show you the exact requests, and show you what is actually happening so you have a better understanding of the authentication flows. Later on, we're going to actually go do AAD as well. So we're going to show you how to use hybrid identity. So identity is coming from the cloud, and then your private cloud stack is in your data center, and how you use hybrid to actually have a hybrid identity provisioning into your stack. And then a little bit about tokens and claims and how it makes sense to different people and how it is applicable to different applications. That would be the agenda for today, right? So all of you must have, I think, heard a rumor that we actually announced a product called Azure Stack somewhere in the keynote. I don't know. I saw it somewhere on Twitter. I don't know. What we're doing today is going to be talking about Windows Azure Pack, which is the product that's currently in the market, and not about Azure Stack. But a lot of what I'm going to be talking today and what we're going to be discussing today is applicable to the Azure Stack as well. But I'm unfortunately not going to be able to go into specific details, as you're going to need to be able to play with the product to be able to understand that stuff. But all the concepts, all the terminology that I'm going to be using is applicable for both those products. So it will be useful for you either ways. I was asked to say this up front because I could give you an opportunity for people to leave if you're actually expecting Azure Stack in the session. Anybody leaving? No? OK. That's good. Let's go to authentication and identity fundamentals. So we've talked to people about identity at different layers to different audiences. We've had IT pros who basically are looking at the infrastructure. We have developers who are basically looking at the API layer, and we're looking at system in more like extension developers who are basically building custom extensibilities for the product. And there's been different terminologies and different kinds of conversations that you've been having with people. So just to account for everybody here in the audience, I'm going to level set on something. This is the standard Azure Pack architecture. So you have the portal, the API layer, the identity system, the resource provider under the API layer, which basically caters to a bunch of resources. So all the way from the portal, the identity system, the service management API layer, up to the resource provider, we're going to call it as control plane or management plane today. And anything that goes between the resource provider and the resources that the resource provider creates, we're going to call it data plane. Right? So it's the difference between control plane identity and data plane identity. If I have to be very simple about it, the identity that you're using to log into your Azure Pack portal would be your control plane identity. And say you create a virtual machine and you log into a virtual machine using an administrator account of that virtual machine, that would be your data plane identity. And in the last slide of this section, we're going to be talking a little bit about how you can actually merge those identities together in different resource providers so that you're able to log in to your control plane, which means your portal, and your data plane, which means your resources, using the same identity. All right. So before we get into any detail, I'd like to ask one question just to kind of understand the level of capability or the level you've played with the Azure Pack product. How many of you here have actually installed Windows Azure Pack and played with it a little bit? Almost. How many of you have never played with Windows Azure Pack at all? Good. That's a sizable number of audience. So we'll have to tone it down a little bit and go down. OK. And how many of you are familiar with the architecture, at least from read articles about Azure Pack, and you're actually interested in knowing about the product, but are familiar with the architecture? That's about a 200. OK, perfect. So we've got a good mix in the audience, so we'll probably go from one level to another, depending on how complex the topic is going to be. Right? So for people who have not played with identity at all and who don't know what identity is and stuff like that, I'm going to be level setting some fundamental ideas or some fundamental terminologies that we're going to be using while discussing this topic. Okay? So basically, we're going to be talking a lot about claims tokens. That's like the fundamental of everything that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about relying parties, federation services, and identity provider. I will do my best to explain all of that to you in detail, so hold off for a little bit. So when I want to explain tokens to somebody, the best way I've thought about is to look at your badges. So all of you have one of these here. Some of you might be speakers, some of you might be attendees, some of you might be exhibitors on the expo floor, and your badge will reflect that with a different color, and it will explicitly state that if you're a speaker or an attendee or an exhibitor or expo only, right? So this is an example of a token. A token contains a lot of claims. Claims are basically things that tells you about the user who's giving it to you. So if I issue a token, or rather, I issue a token about myself, it would have, hey, it's called Sriram Natarajan, it's my name. I work for Microsoft, that would be my workplace. I have an AT&T connection, so that'll tell you my mobile operator. So it's a token that contains a list of claims that tells you about the user. Same thing about here. So it has your name, it has your company, right? And it has what role you serve in this conference. So this is an equivalent of a token that you will get when you sign into an application, right? Now, one important thing is, try taking this badge to your office tomorrow and try swiping it when you want to get in. Not going to work. Try showing it to your security guard. He's going to be like, I don't know what this is, right? He's just going to be saying, this is not something I recognize or understand because this is meant to a specific conference. This is meant to give you access to this particular building. So the building can be considered as an application which you're trying to get access to. Different applications will get different tokens, and you will not be able to reuse the same token across different applications normally, and there are edge cases, right? That's basically how you would explain a token and claims inside a token, right? Now, a relying party is that application that I was just talking about. So you go to the Windows Azure Pack portal, or you go to any application for that matter, facebook.com. You go to facebook.com, and it's going to redirect you to a page where you can actually enter credentials. That was the old Facebook. Now it's got a bar on the top. But typically, there are applications where you go to the application, and it redirects you to another page for you to be able to log in. Because that application is relying on an identity system to be able to provide a user token. So it's going to say, hey, I don't know who this guy is. I'm going to send it to you. You have an idea about his user ID and password and other attributes. So you should authenticate him and give me a token with just the information that I need, which could be a user's UPN or his address, or in some cases phone number, etc., email address, etc. Right? So this application is relying on something for tokens. So that's called a relying party, right? And let's jump across to the fourth one. So the application that's actually giving tokens, that is actually effectively saying, okay, this application wants to authenticate this user. So I'm going to ask him for his user ID, password. I'm going to verify in my database, and I'm going to issue a token whatsoever. that system is going to be called an identity provider. So you have a relying party sending a user to an identity system to get tokens after signing in, right? Now, what you've effectively seen is a system is effectively handing off the authentication to another system, and it will take care of just the authorization part. Once the user comes back, it will take care of if it has subscriptions, if it's a valid user or not. But what's happening is a system is delegating to another system to authenticate a user, right? Now, you effectively split authentication and authorization. Now, assume that this system still doesn't know who you are, and it wants you to send you to another system to authenticate, because it's like, okay, I know this guy, I know you're not inside my system, maybe you're from this guy, and it sends you to a third system, and you go sign in there, so that would be your identity system, and this second application that sends you to the final identity system would be called a federation service. It basically federates a user to go to an identity system or multiple identity system, depending on who the user is, and sends them back to the relying party, which basically trusts that application. This is like very fundamental to the conversation that we're going to be having today. I spent a little bit extra time on this because there are a lot of new people here who haven't had a chance to play with the product, right? For all the people who are like picture-oriented people in the audience, I'm very picture-oriented. So this, let's say this is an application, right? And as I said, it's sending a user to a system which might be an AAD, ADFS, or an AAD, or any identity system that basically works on AD or SQL, etc. In this arrangement, this application is called a relying party. That application is called an identity provider, and it looks into an identity store. Of course, like that's the nomenclature. It looks into an identity store to be able to give the application tokens. Now, the second level. Now, this can basically trust another identity system. And typical examples of federation services are ACS that you have available in Microsoft Azure, and ADFS itself is a federation service. And this basically trusts the other system to give it tokens and will then re-sign the token to send it to the application. So this is going to be called a federation service. This is typically the setup that you're going to be using in your Azure Pack installation typically. This or the one that I showed you previously with just the relying party and the application, right? So what happens when you log into Windows Azure Pack? So you basically have a user, you're going to go open a browser, Internet Explorer, or Microsoft Edge, a browser, an application, and then you're going to be hitting the Azure Pack portal, right? Now, the portal doesn't know who you are, and it has no way of finding out who you are. So it's going to tell you, hey, go to this identity system that I know about, right? Sign yourself in, and get me a token that I understand. So it's going to send you to the identity system. It's going to show a login page that says, hey, enter your credentials here. It's going to enter the credentials. The user is going to enter the credentials. It's going to validate the credentials and issue a token back, right? All of this is now happening inside the context of a browser. So it's just a matter of 302 redirects to different sites, right? Now, you get the token back, and now you're sending it back to the Windows Azure Pack portal, and it's going to be like, hey, hi, Sriram, I understand who you are, and I know this token is valid because I trust the identity system, and it's going to sign the token. So I will give you access to this API layer and take a look at what subscriptions you have. So effectively, authentication happened in the top of the diagram, and authorization is happening at the bottom level of the diagram. So we've effectively split authentication and authorization, right? Non-portal flow. Basically, so let's go back. Yeah, so this is basically explaining. So this is a relying party. That's the federation service. That's the identity provider. And the user is basically using it. That's just, again, context in that slide, right? So non-portal flows. So all of this is happening. The previous flow was in a browser. So the browser is capable of redirecting you to multiple places. So you don't even know what's happening. You just see a couple of flashing white pages, and then you're back in the portal with your credentials. When you're using command line, or when you're actually integrating your own portal with Windows Azure Pack, you need to be able to find out what the identity system is directly and go to the identity system, right? Now, typically, if it is dependent on another identity system, the browser will redirect. But in this example, you don't have a browser. So you need to be able to go to that system directly, get a token, I'm going to call it T-dash, take that token back to this identity system, get it re-signed, and then send it to the application. So you're basically traversing what we call a federation chain, and I will talk a little bit about that as we get into the session. You're traversing the chain, getting a token, getting it signed by the previous STS, the secure token service in the picture, and you're sending it back to the application, right? And then you have a non-portal flow, which is basically your PowerShell, your Windows Azure PowerShell, which basically means that you use certificate-based authentication for a tenant public API. You go to the browser, you upload a certificate, and then you use the public key of that certificate, basically using PowerShell, and you call the tenant public API. So Azure Pack has an admin API, tenant API, and a tenant public API, which is certificate-based. So this would be how cert-based authentication works. In this case, this cert is tied to a subscription, so anybody with that certificate will get access to that particular subscription as a whole. The important point is they only get access to that subscription the certificate is associated with. Whereas in case of your tenant portal, you can actually say, hey, give me a list of all of my subscriptions, and it will give it to you. So we've enabled different models there depending on how you would like to scope access to your Azure Pack system, right? Clear up to this point? Okay. So federation. Now I said, okay, there's this relying party that's basically sending you to a federation service, which is basically sending you to an identity system. You know, there's this whole set of handoffs that are happening. What is it called? Is it like standard? Is it even something that we normally do in the industry? Yes. This entire thing is called a federation chain, and it's a well-defined thing. I actually got that from Wikipedia, by the way. So it basically means I have an application, say the user is in Contoso, and there's an ADFS in between, right? It says, ADFS says, hey, user, go to Contoso, get your token so that I can re-sign the token, send you back to the application. Now, either this can happen, or there might be a bunch of STSs between your ADFS, which is your Azure Pack ADFS, and the final STS that you'd like to go to. So each of those guys will redirect you to the next person in the chain and re-sign the token back so that the application can get access to that user's token. Right? This is a little bit more detail. Let me just dumb it down a little bit, and let's just use a generic form of explaining what a federation chain is then. So you've all flown into Chicago, and I'm assuming you guys are flying out today, tomorrow, end of week. So you guys are passengers that need to catch a plane, right? And this is a very fun example. You should keep up with me on this one. So you're a passenger. You need to get into a plane, right? When you want to do that, you're basically going to need 3 people's assistance. One is you're going to need a ticketing agent who's going to be able to give you a ticket. Then you're going to have to take it to a check-in agent. Nobody really goes into check-in agents unless you have a check-in baggage. You're basically going to go online. So this could be a person or a computer. Your bottom line is you're going to a check-in agent who will get that ticket and give you a boarding pass. Then you're going to take the boarding pass to security, right? And he's going to validate it, or you're going to take it to the gate agent. He's going to look at the boarding pass, and he's going to give you access to a plane, right? Now, that's exactly what happens. That's the typical flow that happens. Now, if you directly go to the security and say, I have no boarding pass, I have no ticket, let me through, he's going to say, I have no idea who you are. For all you know, you might not even be a valid passenger. All I know is the boarding pass. Get me a boarding pass. And he sends you to the check-in agent. Right? The check-in agent is going to be like, you don't have a ticket. Like, I have no way of validating who you are or what you're planning on doing. So here's the guy I trust and I know about. Go to this guy and see what you can do with him. Right? And you go to him and say, hey, I want to be able to get into a plane, but nobody's letting me through. What can you do? He says, okay, I know what's happening. Let me give you a ticket. Right? He gives you a ticket, and then you basically go to your boarding check-in agent, get a boarding pass, and go to a security, and you're happily on a plane. This is what we do every day without knowing that this is federation. Each system is trusting another system to be able to provide it data so that it can operate only on that data and no other data to be able to authenticate another system in the chain. Right? This is federation. So now you're a user at Contoso.com, right? You're a part of the Contoso STS, and you have resources, which is the plane, right? You're accessing that through the WAP portal, and a WAP STS is guarding it, right? Same thing happens. You go to the WAP portal. Like, correlate this with the previous slide. You went to the WAP portal. WAP portal is like, I don't know who you are. I trust this STS. Go to him and get a token. That STS is like, you're not in my identity system. Maybe you're in Contoso's identity system, right? and then go there. The contour store identity system's like, hey, welcome, I know who you are. Gets a token, take you back to ADFS or that WAP STS, and then designs the token and sends you with your boarding pass to your Windows Azure Pack portal. And then you get access to resources. This is typically a flow that happens when you log in to a Windows Azure Pack portal. Does that make sense? Perfect. Now, so merging the control plane and the data plane. So I talked about control plane identities and data plane identities, right? So let's assume you have an Active Directory in your infrastructure, and your Azure Pack, your private cloud system is basically installed in that Active Directory. And say you want to create a VM. An easy way for you to be able to merge your control plane and your data plane identity is, say, when a VM gets created, you automatically join it to that Active Directory domain, right? So then a user who's basically logging into the portal with his credentials will also be able to log into that resource that gets created with the exact same credential, because it's a part of the same Active Directory. It's looking up the same identity store, and he's able to log in. So you have seamless identity transition between your control or your management plane to your data plane. Same thing's possible with SQL also when you do Windows Auth, or suppose you want to do FTP with your websites, join them, make them a part of the same domain, so that the user in that domain should be able to kind of access your FTP if you want, or other systems with the same credential as they use for logging into the management plane. Right? This is effectively the fundamental stuff that you need to be knowing for stuff that's coming after in this session. Right? With that, I'm going to there, control plane, data plane, same animations, copy paste. Right? So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mark, who's going to be talking a little bit about ADFS and what ADFS is, where it fits in the chain, and he's going to show you a quick demo on how this is going to work. With that, Mark?
A quick demo?
Well, try your best.
Well, I just noticed that a lot of the folks in the room are not using Windows Azure Pack at all. It's Friday. It's been a long week. I just want to make it real easy on you guys. So what I have in my environment to set the stage, let's open up the machine. 7, I believe. Yeah. There's 2 machines. One machine has ADFS installed. I have not configured anything. I just installed the ADFS component. That's all. I have another machine which has Windows Azure Pack installed. I have not configured it. I just installed it. All the scripts that I'm going to use throughout the demo, those will be added to the slides. The demo is recorded, so you can just sit back, relax, and look at the demo. Everything will run smoothly, and you can just rehearse that and repeat that in your own environment. So you can leave the room just saying, now I know how to install Windows Azure Pack and set up federation with ADFS. So let's start. I have installed ADFS on this machine. So the next thing that I need to do is actually configure that. So I'll open up the configuration wizard. Take me a while to load. Now I have created a wildcard certificate, and I have created one DNS entry for this security token service, which points to this machine. I'm going to create a new federation server. It's going to retrieve my credentials, which is an administrator account. And I'm going to select that wildcard certificate that I imported earlier. And I'm going to give the name for the security token service, STS. Could be anything in your environment. And this is actually the DNS record that I registered. And I can give it a name. And this is what is actually shown when people log on to the form to enter their credentials. There's a name shown. That is this name. So call that Ignite. Next page. Now I have to specify an account which will run for ADFS as the service account. I have created an AD account, nothing special. I just created it, gave it a password. That's all. So I'm going to select that one, which is called svc_ADFS. You can use it whatever you want in your environment. Select that, specify the password. Hit next. Now I can do 2 things. I could either choose to use a SQL database, which I could make highly available if I wanted to have multiple ADFS instances in my environment, or I can use a Windows internal database. Now there's a kind of resilience with that as well. So we'll just start with the Windows internal database. I'll get a summarize of the selections that I made, and I'm going to hit next, and that will actually start configuring that. It will take a couple of minutes, so what we'll do is we'll hop over to the Windows Azure Pack machine, and we're going to start the installation there too. So I installed the components for Windows Azure Pack through the Web API, just an Express installer with all the components on a single machine. I'm just going to configure it now. So to configure it, I need to log on to the config portal, which is located out of the box on localhost 30101. Continue to this side. As you can see, it's using a self-signed certificate, which is fine. And while it's loading, I just need to create a database with this that is used by Windows Azure Pack. So I'm going to specify the name of the SQL server. I'm going to use SQL authentication for that. Zoom out a bit, so you can actually see something. The passphrase, that is used to initially set up the environment. And if you want to add machines later on to that environment, you need to use that passphrase again. So please keep it somewhere safe. Well, in this case, I'm willing to help the guys out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we're installing that as well. Now, this will also take a couple of minutes. So what I'm going to do next is, while this is running, I'm going to show you the PowerShell scripts that I'm going to run. And before I will run those PowerShell scripts, I will open up IIS and change the bindings. Because all the bindings and the ports that are created are not so user-friendly. And if it's something that we want to route over the public internet, we want to have that on 443 with a public certificate. So those are the two things that we want to do, is change the URLs to something more routable over the internet and that users can actually access. And I'll also have that information stick in a database by running the PowerShell scripts. So while this is running, let's open up the PowerShell script. And I'll first explain what I'll do, and then afterwards actually execute it. So what I'm going to do is connect to that database. Now, I can specify an SA account, so use SQL authentication for that. But I can also use my own credentials, which I'm logged on with, to build up the connection string. And that's what I'm actually doing in this case. Then I'm going to change the URL for the tenant side in the database. So this has nothing to do with what I'm doing within IIS. This is information in a database, because in essence, I could have multiple servers which all have the same configuration. I can change IIS, but there needs to be some kind of central repository which knows that information, which is the database. The second one is then we're going to connect to ADFS, because I somehow need to trust it. Like Sri just explained, these guys don't necessarily talk to each other. It's like an exchange between the user, but it has to know where it has to point the user to. So that's what we're actually configuring here. We configure that for the tenant side, but also for the admin side, because Windows Azure Pack has an admin side to configure the environment and a tenant side, which is multi-tenant, to allow you to log on as a tenant and interact with your services. I think the configuration is probably done. Yeah. So before I actually start, let me check if I'm able to access that AWS environment I was just setting up. Because I haven't checked. I don't know if the installation already done. It probably is. But with this URL, you can actually check that and retrieve that metadata that we're actually going to use later on in the scripts. So I'm going to just copy this over, open up a different URL, and paste that in. And we should retrieve the XML file. So this means ADFS is up and running. So I don't have to look at it anymore. I can just run the scripts. But like I said before I run the scripts, I want to update those endpoints and the bindings on IIS. So let's open up IIS first. And we should see all new virtual, or all the new websites that are created. That loads, yes. These are all the websites that are installed when you install Windows Azure Pack as an Express installer. And you can see that it's not using very user-friendly endpoints. So we're going to pick out the tenant side and the admin side. So let's start with the admin side. Go to bindings, change the URL, and change the port number, 443. If you have multiple sites running on the same machine, and you want to run them on 443, IIS will allow you to do that by using server name indication. That's a check mark that you're seeing right here. And it allows you to then differentiate based on host headers. So I'm going to add a host header for the admin side, which is admin.ignite.com. And we're going to enable that check mark. I'm also going to select the wildcard certificate that I imported earlier, which could be a public certificate. I suggest you do that. And I'm going to do the same thing for the tenant side. I'm just going to only use a different naming convention for that. So I'm going to set that on 443. Require server name indication. This is manage.ignite.com. Now please understand, those two URLs, I created an A record for that in DNS, so it's pointing to the Windows Azure Pack server. Select the same certificate there. And with that, I'm done with the configuration in IIS, and the next thing is configure the database. So I'm going to connect to the database, set up the connection string that is used for a couple of the PowerShell commandlets. I'm going to change the setting, which is still pointing at the old URL, to the new fully qualified domain name. That's one. And the second one is I'm going to connect over to ADFS and retrieve the information about ADFS, which contains the thumbprint and which contains some additional metadata too. We'll do the same for the admin side. Run those in line. And for a tenant, I should now be able to log on if I'm configuring ADFS. But for the admin side, there's an additional action that I should perform. Because what you don't want is that every tenant which is able to access to ADFS can also access the admin side. So by design, by default, no one can actually access the admin side. So you should manually specify which user accounts or which groups actually have access to the admin side. And that's what I'm doing here. In this case, I'm going to use a user account, but essentially I could do the same thing with an AD group. First of all, I need to connect to a different database. So as you can see, this is the management store, and the other one was the management config database. I'm going to retrieve what user accounts are actually having access to that. That's literally nothing. And the last one is I'm going to add that user account so I can use that to later on to log on to the admin side. Now these last two, these aren't necessary in your environment. This is just for the purpose demo, because when I now hop over to the ADFS portal, I need to actually do the same thing. I need to update ADFS about the relaying party, which is actually Windows Azure Pack, so it knows how to redirect the information back. But I just installed Windows Azure Pack, so it still has to be loaded into IIS. So what I'm actually doing with these two PowerShell lines is load that information in, so you don't have to wait additionally. That's all. So let's execute that one and hop over to ADFS. That is installed, as we can see. Now for ADFS, I sort of need to do the same thing. We have a graphical user interface which allows you to do that. So we're just going to add two relaying parties that are relying on ADFS. So we go to the trust relationships. You can see there's already one claims provider, which is the identity provider, which will actually validate the credentials of this user account. And if we go to the relaying party trust, we can just add a new one. I have another script which contains the same URL in essence. Let's open that up. One is pointing to the tenant side, and the other one is pointing to the admin side. So I'm going to set up two relaying party trusts. So let's first start with the tenant side. This one is here. And now it's actually going to connect up to Windows Azure Pack to retrieve that same Federation metadata about Windows Azure Pack. It will probably still take some time. So let's copy over that next one too. There we go. It has retrieved the URL. I just can give it any name that I want. I'll have the same URL. That's probably the easiest one. I'm not going to configure anything with MFA just yet. And I'm going to permit everyone that has access to ADFS to log on to the application too. That's fine. It shows the information that was retrieved. And to finish it up, it opens up a wizard if I have this checkmark enabled, to actually configure claims that are coming in. These are called claim rules, which I can adjust if I want to. But if I don't add any claim rule, then information that is coming in is never passed towards the application. So I need to add at least one claim rule. Windows Azure Pack will allow you to add two, and that is a UPN and a group claim. We're just going to use UPN for the demo, but you can add group claims too. So I'm going to close that out. Now that wizard starts, I'm going to add a rule, which essentially just only passes through the information that comes from the security token service to the application. That's all. So I'm going to pass through a filter, an incoming claim. The claim rule, you can just call it whatever you want. The incoming claim type will be UPN. And I'm just going to pass that through. So I'm not going to adjust it or whatsoever. So finish that one. And we just set up the federation for the tenant side. Now we're going to do the same for the admin side. So add another one. And to give you an idea, it's exactly the same URL, but just the different endpoint. I'm only going to change this, admin. And it's exactly the same that I'm doing now. So I can click through this quite quickly. Add a rule, pass through. This is completely the same process that I did just before. Specify claim type, UPN. Finish that off. Now you'd say, well, we set up Windows Azure Pack to point at ADFS. We set up ADFS to point at Windows Azure Pack. We're done. Well, almost. There are a couple of things that you need to take care of, and that is, for instance, you'll need JSON web ticket support for the token. Now, that is something that ADFS can provide for you, but it's off by default. So we need to enable that for those two relaying party trusts. And that's something that we can do with just D2 commandlets. In essence, just one, and we're pointing at the admin side or the tenant side. The second one is, and this is not necessarily required, but if I log on and I have multiple security token services or multiple identity providers that I can choose from, and I select one for the first time, and I log on successfully, I close down my browser, the next time I'm going to log on again, it's going to automatically redirect me to the selection that I make the first time, which is fine for certain cases, but if you want to select from the different ones each and every time, you should disable the cookie and it show you the option to choose identity provider when you log on again. So we're going to do that. And lastly, because I'm internal to this environment, in essence, I'm sitting in the same domain, I don't even get prompted by a form. I have true single sign-on, but I want to show you that form. So what I'm going to do is change the integrated authentication to the form-based authentication by this PowerShell script. So this is something that you not necessarily need to do in your own environment. And the last one is if you just want to verify if your AWS environment is actually running, you don't need a relaying party for that. You can just open it up by hitting ADFS directly. All these URLs are in the scripts in the deck, and I can execute and log on to ADFS directly. Now, when we log on to the admin side, let's try if that works. I should log on to admin.ignite.com, and it goes so fast, I was even thinking, well, I didn't type it in yet. I'm redirected to the ADFS portal. So I'm going to log on. And I should be redirected to the admin side. Within the admin side, I'm going to connect to a resource provider, which is SQL. And then I'm going to log on as a tenant and see that I actually can subscribe to a plan. And that is something that we'll capture with Fiddler, which will free run then explain how we can look and dive into the claims. But for now, we need to log on. Everybody still with me? Is this easy? This is quite easy, right? You can do this at home. And it took me like 15 minutes?
15.
So while this is loading, I can actually log on to the tenant side, start my fiddler trace. Should use HTTPS. Login is free RAM.
How do you know my password?
You just told me to. I can call it out loud if you want.
No, thank you.
So you see I'm able to log on to the tenant side, and I think the admin side already logged on too. So I'm going to stop that fiddler trace when I actually have access, and Sri can explain those fiddler tokens. Well, you can take it from here, Sri.
Yeah, I can just take it from
Okay.
here. So we've already seen that it's come back to the web portal, so we're running a little late on time, so I'm just going to really quickly get past that. Okay, so let me clean this up a little bit. Have you guys seen Fiddler? Have you guys used Fiddler? Okay, so a lot of people are saying yes. So I'm just going to kind of clean up the stuff that we don't need, just to be sure. We could filter it, but we wanted to show you the entire set of things that's happening. All of this is like just tunneling and stuff that we probably are not going to be discussing right now anyways, right? So here's what I want you guys to see here. So we basically hit manage.ignite.com, and I'm going to tie this back into my slides the way I'm going to keep saying this all through the presentation effectively. It's like I hit my tenant portal, right? It says, hey, I don't know who you are, right? Go to this STS. It's sts.ignite.com that Mark just configured. And that page, that just says, hey, give me a page where the user can sign in. So this is basically something that is a user sign-in page. And Mark entered his credentials, and it basically went back, and it authenticated Mark, or rather, it authenticated me, and sent me back to the web tenant portal, right? And when you look at it here, you can actually see the web forms view, and you should actually be able to see it in here. So this is a request header. The token is right here. If you just look for security token, you should be able to find it. And the token is basically this guy, right? Now this is on the wire. We're basically capturing HTTPS traffic here. Users are not going to be able to do that because it's HTTP secure, and we're actually on the machine that's happening. We're taking the token from HTTPS, right, so that we can show you how to decode it. Fiddler has this awesome text editor that can actually let you do it. So basically, you took the HTTPS traffic, you got the token, and you've decoded it. So you've decoded HTTPS at this point. Now this token itself is encrypted and encoded because it's a secure communication between your identity system and your relying party, right? So we can still decrypt this again. So I can just send the output to input, and it basically decrypted me to a set of tokens that you currently see here. Like, let me go in detail and show you that. So the first line is basically the type of token it is and the token data. And the one that I've actually highlighted is basically my actual user token, my ID card, that basically says, hey, the audience is the tenant site because Mark signed into the tenant site, right? The issuer or the STS is sts.ignite.com/ADFS. That's who is issuing the token, right? Issued at an expiry, when the token was issued and up until what time is it valid. And then the UPN is sriram@ignite.com, and that is the authentication time effectively. So this is my ID card that I'm going and getting from the STS, and I'm bringing it back onto my Windows Azure Pack portal, right? Now, there are other ways, like people who've been working with Azure Pack actually know that there are other ways where you can actually get a token. Oops, my system locked itself out. So let me show you another way. We basically wrote a PowerShell script and we put it up on TechNet. It's actually available on TechNet Gallery. It's called decode JOT token, where you can actually basically go in and give it a JOT token, like how I did here. So I basically got the token through different methods. I can have a get Windows Azure get WAP token. There are different PowerShell commandlets that let you get a token programmatically, and I can feed it into this script, and that will automatically like decode it and do a pretty print for me. Or if you don't want to use the fiddler tool, you can basically copy the request right off. There are like different plugins that will let you do it even from within the context of a browser. Get that token, and you can just use that. Just copy paste that and use it with this script, and use a recurse flag that will like recursively go and decrypt it and decode it and then do a pretty print and then show you the token values. So this is how you kind of interact with this flow. Like that, this is like the bare bones of how this authentication system happens, right? And then you get the token and you're able to see what it is actually informing about you to the identity system. And in the interest of transparency, this is not particular to Windows Azure Pack at all. This is typically how any identity system, that's claim-based identity system, works with any application that it actually is supposed to give tokens to. So what I'm basically doing is enabling you to kind of understand the authentication flow that's the industry standard for an identity system with any application that it's registered with. This is one of the different protocols that are being used, right? Now, so we basically talked about tokens and claims. I'm just going to switch back. So we basically talked about claims. We showed you how to capture tokens using Fiddler. Fiddler is a free software that you can download. I also talked about the get mgmt svc token commandlet that you can use to get a token, right? Look up the STS, find the request that you know kind of redirects you back to the portal, and look at the bearer token or look at the token that's returned from the STS to the application, right? So that being said, let's go in a little bit. Well, I probably didn't go to the slides at all. So up until this point, we've basically talked to you about the stuff that we've been talking about in the first slides, just the basics. We went from what is a token, what is an application. We've stepped it up step by step into a state where we've actually shown you what Windows Azure Pack is, what ADFS is, how you configure ADFS. Right? Now, from here on, we're going to be stepping it up even further, and we're going to be talking about multi-factor authentication with ADFS, and moving on to hybrid identity and telling you the value prop or showing you how it's done using AAD. Right? So we're gradually stepping you up to a level where you can actually say that, okay, I now know almost everything about identity with Windows Azure Pack. Right?
Yeah, right.
That, handing it off to Mark.
Okay, thanks. So Azure AD allows you to do something like multi-factor authentication, but that's like a cloud service, right? Is that something that you can integrate with your on-prem? It actually is, and it's quite easy too. What you can do with MFA, it allows you to authenticate by, for instance, a mobile app or a phone call, what we'll see in a second, or text messages, and that's something that Sri's going to demo, I believe. And we can just pick up the functionality that is in Azure and add that to our on-prem installation. Is that a complex thing? It really isn't. If we look at the fundamentals, it's just a feature of the identity system that is in Azure today. And besides the authentication method that you get with Azure AD, ADFS ties into multiple identity providers if you want to. But essentially, since it's so simple, why use something else like Azure AD? There is one MFA adapter, which is in Azure AD, and that's the default one we're going to show today. And as you can see, Windows Azure Pack retrieves the token as a part of that token handshake. So with further ado, we're just going to go to that demo. Back to the slides again. What I actually done, I haven't configured that either. I just installed the MFA module on-prem, and that's all. So what do you need to do for that? Get this out of the way, sign out, close this, and go to my ADFS environment, do the same here. And before I actually do that, it's very easy to customize that web form we just saw to log on. It's just a couple of commands, as you can see here. So let's execute those. Now, I have installed the MFA adapter. That is something that you can download from the Azure portal. So I've logged on here. When you go to Azure AD, multi-factor authentication providers, you can just drill out, create one there, and manage that directly from the portal. From that management page, you're able to download that software and install it. It has a couple of requirements that will go installed as a part of the installer. And when you actually click the download, you would also get the activation credentials. Now, those credentials are necessary when you configure the adapter. So let's copy that over. Let's start the adapter. And I'm just going to register that. Copy over the password. It's all recorded, so you can use this one at home. I'll be billed for it. Use the correct password. There we go. Copy that. Click Activate. It now connects over to Azure to actually validate this information. And then when that's actually done, I can select which group. The default group is just fine. Would I like to run the wizard? No, I don't want to have a multi-server configuration right now, so I'm going to skip that one. And you see that the tools are handing me over additional information. So I only need to do things. And that is, one, I need to connect it up to ADFS. And two, I need to import the users from the AD environment into this tool. So go to ADFS, select Allow Users Enrollment, install ADFS adapter, and let it configure itself. That is just fine.
So you're just plugging in the MFA adapter into ADFS?
Exactly. So now it has a connection, but it doesn't know any users, so it doesn't know what user is able to use that authentication. So that's the second thing I need to do. So while this is running, go to the users. Probably need to wait for that before I can click on it. It's Friday. Azure is tired too. So while the environment is configured, I can import users from Active Directory, select the directory it's part of. I can use everything or just drill down into the organizational unit where the tenants are actually located. And I'm going to select that one, which is fine. Select that OU, import it. Yes, one added. This one is also done. And that's all you need to do within ADFS. Now, the second thing is there's one PowerShell commandlet that you need to run. That is also very easy. All the scripts are added to the deck. You can just copy that over. And the last thing you need to do is update ADFS and specify what user accounts are actually using this plugin. You can do that here with the authentication policies. Loading. Let me see.
So a typical use case for this would be that in your Azure Pack stack, you're going to have administrators and tenant users. You want administrators to have that extra level of security so that they can, protect themselves from any malicious people accessing the system. So you can just have MFA for your administrators and let your tenants sign in with their own credentials. And that's the point of having selective users have MFA and others having a direct access into the system.
I'm just waiting for the ADFS portal to come up again because I just restarted the service. Very friendly to me today. Let's close that out.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Open it up again. That works better. That's not the one I want. Authentication policies. Go to the Edit Global Primary Authentication, multi-factor, add my friend here. And I'm going to select he's going to use Windows Azure Multi-Factor Authentication. That's it. Now, when I go to the Windows Azure Pack portal, you're going to see two things. So let's close this one too. And close this one too. I should get that customized form that I just ran, and I should get the option, or at least a requirement, to authenticate with multi-factor authentication. So let's verify that. support is quite nicely adapted.
So this was the customization script that Mark just ran in between. It's just easy to kind of rebrand and apply a different theme to the ADFS login page. I actually want to know who the guy behind us is. See him a lot.
Yes, and you can see that I now get that second option. And if I click continue, I should get a call on my phone. Put the sound on a bit. There it is. Answer that. Click the pound sign, and I'm actually signed in. That's how easy it is to set up MFA in your environment. Thanks a lot.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
So what I'd like you guys to take away from this is that the MFA that just happened inside ADFS before it came back to the web portal. Right? So the applications that you're building don't need to support MFA because ADFS has its own feature where it will take care of all the interactions that need to happen with MFA, and then in the end, authenticate the user and hand you a token and say, go play with this token at the moment. Right? Now, we just saw how it looks like when you want to set it up in your own data center. Right? You had your WAP installation, you have a bunch of machines for WAP, and then you set up ADFS. You probably want to maintain an ADFS farm, and then you kind of keep doing your own thing. Right? Now, let me show you how easy this is to use Azure. So now we're coming to a state of hybrid identity. This is basically saying I'm going to use Azure Active Directory. My users are available in Azure Active Directory, and I want to provide users to my Azure stack from my Azure Active Directory. Let me swap a little bit. And we're also going to see MFA depending on how much time we have, but at least let's just do the Azure Active Directory bit. Right? So now I'm going to open up a portal. Right? Let's actually close this. I'm going to open up the portal and say I want to go to manage.windowsazure.com. I'm actually going to my Azure portal. I actually had my session in there, so I'm going to do this again. Let's try a private browsing window and say there we go. Now it shows me a login page. I'm going to log into my Azure portal. Right? I'm using my Microsoft credential to go log in. Right? Now, once this is done, Azure is going to send me to my other login page. It says, hey, you picked up my credentials from Windows, but it says Microsoft has enabled you to, let's get to that. So this is my password. It says, hey, Microsoft has enabled MFA on your account. So, sign in so that I can kind of tell you who you are, right? And this is going to call me into my app. Now, this is very important, and I'll tell you why this is important the minute I answer this call. It says,
using Microsoft sign-in verification system.
I'm just going to be able to enter my PIN. And once I'm done entering my PIN, it's basically going to clear out of this page, and authentication just got completed. Now, what's important to note here is that I signed in with my Microsoft Corp credential, which is going through AAD at this point, right? But AAD, or Azure for that matter, does not have my credentials, right? All it has is my user ID. So when people say sync your identities into Azure, there are two ways you can do it. You can either completely sync your entire user information into Azure and let Azure manage it, or you can do something called just like sync your user identity into it, and Azure will redirect to your native ADFS or your on-premise identity system, and your credentials are still stored on-premise. That's typically how most people do it these days, because you can maintain your identity independent of Azure and use Azure as an authentication service. Right? This in contrast to what we're going to be doing right now. So typically, I'm an administrator, and I can actually go in and say, let me just sign into this one just to, while that's happening, right? Okay, so now what I'm doing is I, as an administrator, can basically go and create my own directory tenant. So if I go to App Services, Active Directory, I can go in and create my own Azure Active Directory. All it takes is for me to fill this one form out, right? Let me call it Ignite Sri, right? This is the name, right? I'm going to call it Ignite Sri on Microsoft.com, and I'm going to select East US. Do we have East US? You have US. There we go. And that's basically it. I didn't install anything. I don't have anything on, like, I don't need any machines. I just went into Azure, and I created my own Active Directory completely, right? So now that system might have finished complete. So I'm actually going to go, and as you can see, I have many Active Directory systems, right? And this will now let me dersync my users from my on-premise Active Directory if I choose to, or I can directly go and manage users right here. So I can go add user, new user in my organization, and I'm going to call him Mark. It's because you know my password. I'm going to know yours now. Mark. Mike. I'm just creating a user. I'm not doing MFA right now. I will do it later. So I just created a user called Mark, and then it gave me a temporary password for Mark, right? I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here just to be sure. Okay, that's it. My user has now been created in Azure Active Directory. So I'm basically managing my entire user set directly from Azure Active Directory, right? Now, to connect Azure Active Directory to your Azure Pack instance, you need something called an ACS in between. ACS is one of Azure's features, and that's the federation service I was talking about. Now, why do you need ACS? Why can't you just do Azure Active Directory? Two reasons. One is Azure Pack is actually using WS Federation protocol, and AAD does not issue JOT tokens over WS Federation protocol. And so we need something in between that will translate the tokens. So ACS has been used as a federation service so that AAD can be the identity provider. And I can very easily go in and create an ACS services, access control services, the same way I created my Azure Active Directory. Just go give it a name, pick a region, and it's done. Right? So let's use a directory tenant for the interest of time. I'm just going to use a directory tenant that I already created earlier. I called it Ignite AAD1, right? I have a set of users. I'm just going to go create, IGAAD1. And we're just going to create a user really quick. I'm going to call it Mark. Creating a user, done, create, just copy the password, allow access, yes. Use this user instead, right? And then done, right? Now I've already created an ACS instance, which basically lives here in Azure. I just go back and click on ACS. I have an IGAAD ACS instance that I've created. I can go manage this to say, hey, I'm going to manage my access control services. Now, if you look at this, this is very similar to the ADFS page that Mark showed you. It has like identity providers, relying parties, some rule groups, and information that is used to actually manage the ACS service, right? So I can go to identity providers, and I can add an identity provider, right? So I can use a WS Federation identity provider. That's basically what we're using as a protocol. Enter a name called IGAAD1, which is my Active Directory tenant, and I can enter the federation metadata URL. So I'm basically connecting my federation service to my identity provider now, right? And then we're going to be connecting our relying party to our federation service. So that completes the federation chain effectively. So I'm on my federation service right now, and I need the federation metadata of my identity provider, right? I can just basically go in here, which is my IGAAD Active Directory, right? When I go to applications, I can basically go view endpoints, right? And there's my federation metadata endpoint. I can go copy that, and I can go paste it in the URL here. Very similar to what we did for ADFS. I actually copied the wrong endpoint. I'm sorry. I'm going to go federation metadata, copy, right? I'm going to paste it here. And that's all it takes. Just complete this form and click on save. And that's all it takes for you to be able to add an identity provider to ACS, which is your AAD at this point. I've already created that here effectively. So this is my IGAAD that I've already added. You can see the URL that's there, and I've just called it something, right? Now, I've connected my federation service to my identity system. Let's go connect my relying party to my federation service, right? I'm going to use the exact same script that Mark had. I'm just going to put it into a new window. As you can see, I'm just setting relying party settings. This is exactly what Mark used to set up WAP with ADFS also. So it's the exact same commandlet. I'm just going to kind of point it to my AAD endpoint, ACS endpoint. It's called IGAAD1. Let me double check. Yes, it's called IGAAD1, right? Now I'm going to run this one. Script is about to be saved, sure. And that's it. I've now set up my relying party with my federation service to my identity provider. Now let's see what happens when I log in. Right, so I close the browser, I open it, right, and now, wait, what happened? That's not right. It's probably cached somewhere. Okay, so that's good. It was cached. I'm sorry. So I went to my tenant portal, right? And it automatically now redirected me to the new identity system that I just configured with, not the old ADFS there, right? And now it now gives me Windows Live and IGAAD. I'm just going to click IGAAD, and it now takes me to my Azure Active Directory. So relying party sent me to the federation service, which is now sending me to the identity provider, where I can go sign in. Right? So I just created a user, right? I had Mark as a user in there. Where is that? Let's close you. Let's go to users. I had Mark as one of the users there, so I'm going to do Mark at IGAD, this guy. Paste it in here, right? And the password was the temporary password that was just given to me because this is the first time Mark is signing in. So I'm now taking on Mark's persona. As an end user, when I'm signing in, it's going to say, hey, change your password, because that was a temporary password. I'm entering a new password. And once that's done, it's going to say it's changed my password. It's sending me back to accesscontrol.windows.net right here. So it sent me back to my federation service, and it sent me back to my relying party, which is my WAP tenant portal. So you basically, in the two demos that you've seen WAP with an identity provider, and you've seen WAP with the federation service talking to an identity provider. So federation and federation chain explained, right? Now, again, as you saw in the last demo, let me enable MFA for this particular user, right? So you can go create a new MFA user by saying new app services multi-factor provider, right? You give it a name, and there are different usage models. You can either do it by user or you can do it per authentication. And you can link it to an Active Directory that you just have created. I so happen to have created an MFA provider called IGAAD MFA, right? This is my MFA provider. So once I'm done creating an MFA provider and tying it to my Active Directory, I can basically go into my directory and manage it per user. So I'm going back to my Active Directory, going to my users, selecting a user, and I'm saying manage multi-factor authentication, right? Now what Mark showed you was a desktop-based interface where you could use your on-premise Active Directory users and how you can manage MFA for them. This is, if you have users in the cloud already, you don't need to download anything. You can just do all of this in the context of a browser in Azure. So it opened up another page where it's got a list of all of my users, right? I'm going to say I want to enable MFA for Mark Van Eyck, right? And it says enable. Actually, before I do this, I need to be able to give him a phone number. So I'm going to go into Mark Van Eyck's profile, right? I'm going to go into work info and say, hey, this would be Mark Van Eyck's phone number if I authenticate. So I'm going to go to United States, and I'm going to give Mark's number. Feel free to spam him. So I just gave Mark's phone number. Let me double check the number because some poor guy's going to get phones otherwise. 75, yeah, that's good. So I just added Mark's number. So I go into my MFA and say I want to enable authentication for Mark Van Eyck, right? Done. So it's enabled. Now, when I actually go back to my Windows Azure Pack portal, right, I can go, I will close you. Let me open a private browsing window just to be sure. Right, now I'm going to go to, again, tenant portal, sent me to the ACS, which is the federation service, sending me to my identity provider, and I'm signing in with Mark's credentials. Just going to copy his, I'm trying to avoid as many typing mistakes as possible, I'm sorry. Right? And now, Mark, when he signs up, he's like, hey, your admin basically has enabled MFA for you now. You just can't sign in the way you want to. So for the first time, set up your MFA. So it already knows about Mark's phone number that I basically gave in the Azure portal as an administrator. And it takes him to this page that says, either call me or send me a code by text message every time I try to log in, right? And what it's going to say is, OK, so we've sent you a text message at this number. And Mark is basically going to get a text message with that number in there. So I'm going to open that, and this is the code. So it's 793655. Right? And once he's done, it's validating it, right? Once it's done doing that, it's basically saying it's going to go back to my ACS portal. Uh-oh. Demo glitches. Let's do that again really quick. So it's actually texting me again because I already set it up once. That's what I meant. Once you already set it up, it's not going to ask you to set it up again. It says, I have a second code here. So 701281. So with the verification code, it's actually validating if Mark is a regular user or not. And once it's done authenticating, sent me back to the federation service, which is ACS. You didn't even see that happen because it happened instantly. And now you're back on the WAP tenant portal. And now MFA is actually working. So we have like 4 minutes left, perfect timing. So let's just quickly recap what we'd like to do, right? So what we did in the session was, hey, so we started off from claims, tokens, federation service, the fundamentals of what you need to know to understand identity. We stepped it up by showing you how to configure WAP with ADFS and how to configure the details, the gears inside ADFS. Moved up a little higher and said, how do you configure MFA to ADFS? And then completely scaled up and said, now that you don't have to make any complex infrastructure investments for your identity infrastructure, here's how Azure lets you do it. And I created an Azure Active Directory. I created users, right? And I talked about the differences between actually having users in Azure versus having on-premise users just merely be an entity in Azure and signing up on-premise, not having to sync the users and passwords. And then we enabled MFA for Azure, and the user was able to sign in with MFA. So the identity stack for your system can be achieved with a complete on-premise investment, or go completely hybrid with Azure Active Directory and be able to get the exact same feature set that you have available if you went on-premise. With that, thank you so much. I'm obligated to show you a couple of slides. If you have any questions, we'll take them. Here are resources. You can download them, and we put the scripts up also. And please absolutely rate our session so we'll know feedback and we'll know what to do next time. All right? Thank you so much, you guys.